Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, be the final segment of the roundtable. That is what one listener called it, on how to complete the Common App Activities section. Our speak pipe question is from Kathie from California, and she wants to know, my daughter's having an amazing experience, but she isn't getting any internships. Will not getting any internships hurt my daughter when it comes to the job market? And Lisa will join me to discuss that question. Our interview is part 204 of how homeschooled students are evaluated in the college admission process, with Dr. Michele Evard, Holly Ramsey, and Michele and Liam Dailey from Beloit College. Our college spotlight is the final part of Michael Keaton, the VP of Enrollment at Ursinus College, helping us to understand Ursinus College. Friends, hopefully you've enjoyed part 1 and part 2 of our admissions roundtable with 5 different members of our team talking about the activity section. It's now time for the final part. You know, I want to come back to something. It's come up a few times, and I think it's so much more important than I think most students and parents think, and that is personal qualities.
Mm-hmm.
So multiple times it's been said, like you just referred to it, Hillary, in your example about the perseverance, and it's come up before. And it's obviously true in the essays too, right? Like so many extrapolations are made about character. And I think the combination of recommendations, activities, interviews when you have one, and writing lead to learning a lot about what kind of a person is this person going to be. And one thing I always like to say to my students is, you know, if you sleep 7 hours a night, that's 49 for the week. And if you're in class 15, that still leaves over 100 hours when you're not asleep and you're not in class. Like what are you doing to have impact? I recently met with leaders at UNC because I was trying to figure out what does it take to get into this place out of state. And I really liked that they highlighted personal qualities that stand out, and it wasn't just leadership.
Yes.
You know, the example that they shared was inclusivity,
Mm-hmm.
the person that can bring everybody together, like how valuable that is. And I don't see a lot of people asking me about this.
Mm-hmm.
I see people asking about accomplishments and things, or U Chicago summer program or something like thinking like these are
points.
Yeah, these are the things that really land. When I think a lot of times it's like, what kind of character does this person have? And what will they be like, you know, in the dorm, as a roommate, as a hallmate, you know, in discussions. And I really think right now, because we're so divided, schools are going to be really looking for people that can get along with a wide range of different types of kids in a residential setting.
Absolutely. You know, the whole idea of, you know, courageous conversations, and where are students who are bringing an interest in cross-cultural communication and community building to a campus. And that isn't something that fits well on a resume. I mean, it's going to be stuff that shows up in a lot of parts of an application. You know, that kind of character of community building and civil discourse. You know, because not all kids are fitting into a talent niche and have a hook of some kind, or Velcro, or whatever we call it, that causes a college to have a particular interest in them. But they're looking for building a community of differences and integrity. And they're very, very hungry for moral leadership. I've heard more and more colleges say that in different ways, but the absence of moral leadership is troubling for everybody, and it's exacerbated in residential communities that tend to be a magnet for diversity. And I just would love to get kids in that mindset to think about that. Not every kid is a social justice warrior or the disability warrior, but there's so many ways that kids can elevate communication in the classroom, in the school. And when they think about who's going to write their letters of recommendation, I always say to students, think about who can talk about those qualities of citizenship in the classroom. How you treat others, how you elevate the tone in a classroom, the tone of not just inquiry, but of engagement of a group of people who think about things differently. And so often students will say to me, well, how do I do that? It's what we're talking about, but why does it count? Why is that a measurable asset in a way in my portfolio? And it's interesting to see where they're coming from. If they're coming from schools, like ours, Mark, where we worked, or that Julia knows well, and that it's part of the curriculum, it's part of clubs and activities. But that's not true at 5%. I would say every boarding school in the country teaches this because they teach community, and that's why colleges do. They love it when kids have gone to boarding school. They love it when they've gone to residential summer camps and done the same thing, right? Because it's a wonderful learning platform. And that's why even still now, scouting is highly respected by colleges because of kind of the growth through skill building, but also through service and communication. There are all sorts of ways kids can demonstrate this.
But I love it when students make that connection for me, when they tell me what they learned as, an Eagle Scout, or when they tell me what they learned as a dorm proctor, or whatever it is that they're doing that is sort of maybe a leadership or a mentorship type role. Somebody asked me the other day, like, how do you show those personal qualities through the activities list? And I think you can't assume that whatever personal qualities you want to show through the activities list are going to come out unless you tell us what they are, right? And so kind of connecting the dots, whether it's in the description of the activities or it's in one of your essays, I think I need someone to connect those dots for me, because a student who is working 20 hours a week at Taco Bell, the personal qualities that come through from that student could be that they show up, they're reliable, people can count on them. But it also could be that they're the person who makes everyone around them happy, who lightens the mood, who makes the job more fun to do, right? And those are two very different kinds of students or kinds of people doing the same job. And I don't know which student it is just from looking at their activities list. So that's where I need somebody to sort of make those connections for me.
That's such an important point.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know, you all probably get this too, is like one of the, how to make a resume or activities list better is my child is missing leadership, right? And I think we've overused that word, and I think we all speak of it in a way with good intentions, and what we mean by that is just being a model of something that is good and hopeful, and not in the formal sense. And so it's not bad if you don't have all formal leadership titles or any formal titles. And in fact, I think it would be terrible if colleges only admitted leaders. Sometimes leaders are just the loudest or the most popular. These are high schools at the end of the day, right? Like these are students electing each other. So what's more important is sometimes a college needs to be made up of, yes, some leaders, but also some of the glue kids, the students that can really bring things together, or the ones that, will show up 20 minutes ahead of the event. So that way somebody is there to put tablecloths on the table, or maybe mediate a situation, or maybe see where a leader is struggling and offer some support. These are you need these people as well to make a community work. And so to Hillary's point is just because you don't have formal leadership in an organization or activity, please put down like, help to do this, or this is, or what your role might be, even if it's not a formal leadership title.
We had a listener from Texas who sent in a speak pipe question that was a little frustrated because they kept going to info session after info session and they kept hearing leadership, 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 leadership. And I thought they had a really good point. Their question was, does everybody have to be a leader?
Mm-hmm.
And what it reminded me of is how sloppy we can be with the use of that word, because a lot of times schools mean impact, right? Like everybody wants positive impact. Like the example Hillary gave of you're at Taco Bell and you make, the workplace better for everybody. That's positive impact. You might not have even been a supervisor. So you could call that informal leadership if you want, but it's impact, it's positive impact. And I think sometimes students do underestimate work. Work can be a very, very valuable extracurricular. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes people think it has to be some like prestigious, research opportunity that you got. Like it can be scooping ice cream. It really can be, right? And especially if you're able to, as Hillary said, connect the dots of what you learned, how you grew, how you changed, how your perspective is different. Like that's very valuable. And I think sometimes that people like to see that someone can get their hands dirty and they didn't have everything just given to them on a silver platter. Like there can be value to that too.
Yes. Or I find my students are very much in a lovely protected bubble. And when they maybe take a service job, such as working at a kitchen or working in retail, they end up working with people who are really different ages, really different backgrounds. And they get outside of that bubble and they gain perspective, even if that person might not be their best friend in life, right? They've really gotten something. And I also find that they get kind of frustrated with their peers who might not have a traditional sort of high school job, where they're like, how do they not know how to write an email? How do they not know how to ask their boss for this, right? And we all know, as working on colleges or working in higher ed, like I very much value the student who has had some real world experience and knows how to communicate with adults in a way that shows that they've been exposed to different folks of different walks of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of them being responsible for showing up when, whenever they happen to be assigned a shift, that's really meaningful to us, I think.
Absolutely.
Susan, you mentioned in our pre-planning active verbs. Do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I think that's a way that any student can kind of uplift their activities list. A lot of them are written with like business professional language. And this is where you can run into a little trouble with a lot of abbreviations. You've really got to find a right balance so that the meaning of what you're saying isn't diminished necessarily by the style that you're doing. But, I've seen a lot of kids helped by, Googling for a list of active verbs, active words on the internet. And, instead of saying led or created or fixed, there are 100 other ways to talk about what you've done in an activity or a hobby or anything, that the words are more descriptive.
That's great essay writing advice too, obviously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, you don't have to, with your activities list, look for words that have energy and meaning and aren't just business professional language. And sometimes you'll use both. You'll mix them up. I've read a lot of very emotional activities lists, and it's fun because it shows me something about the kids, esprit. They're hard, but you don't want to be repetitive. You don't want to use the same descriptor words over and over. It's not a resume. It's not. You shouldn't be using cold resume language. And use the internet. Look for lists of active verbs. It can be very inspiring.
One thing that stresses out my students a lot, as soon as they get word that the order matters to colleges, then it's like, should this be my number 2 or should this be my number 5?
Right.
Don't we get
Yes.
that question a lot, Julia?
Yes, all the
Like,
time.
and
In fact,
so,
sometimes that can be
yeah.
like a 20-minute meeting. Just
That's-
where does
Oh
this
my
go?
goodness.
So what are your thoughts, on that? What's your advice to a student? They know order is important. What would you say, Julia?
So then especially for the ones that really do need that kind of guardrails, is I say, let's go with your top 5. And then I actually listed all out with them, whether it's 5, whether it's 15, and we list them all out. And then I actually look at what I think, and based on what they described to me, is sort of like their top 5 most meaningful and time commitments. But then I also look at the balance in those. So, for example, I've got maybe a recruited athlete who does the first 5 activities is the club sport they play on, the varsity sport they play on, that they do service work with the sport, that they're part of an women in athletics club. So if everything is athletics in those top 5, I'm like, let's find like the 6th or 7th meaningful activity to you, and let's just give a little bit balance, just so you're not looking like just the soccer player who suckers all over the place. So I actually find if I write it down while the student describes it to me, or we work in a Google Doc together and I just get my notes, that we can start to look at the weight and the meaning to the student, but also with a mind to, are we getting the full picture of you, just in case your reader is really just going to focus on that, first 75% of that first page.
Boy, especially if the student is not continuing the activity.
Right.
Because that it may have consumed their high school experience, but they, for whatever reason, they're not going to be continuing it, especially at a high level in college, but yet it dominates the top, 5 spaces on the list. Then I think, in a way, you can say to your son or daughter or your college counselee, I understand these have been your most time consuming and compelling activities, but because they're not going to continue to be that in your life at college, can we think about showing the colleges right off the bat what else is super interesting to you and what you may well be carrying forward? Now, I know the whole thing about transferable skills, that sometimes you can look at an athlete who's laying down that sport, or the ballerina, or the student who's been hyper focused on something and they've got a resume a mile long and it has squeezed out a lot of other activities. And if they're not necessarily continuing, especially at that level, they're the ones that sometimes struggle to figure out how to present the fact that they have wonderful transferable skills and that they're incredibly excited about moving into some other areas of interest. And I'm like, well, there's your personal statement, or your additional information. Tell that story. It's very believable. You're not alone.
Yeah, I would say that also those first 5 activities that's like really important space, right? And so if you're writing about something in the essay that you could stick into one of those first 5, you might not want to use one of those first 5 for that thing that you're writing your essay about. Like, for example, if you studied abroad, lots of students will put their study abroad in one of their first 5 activity section or activity bullets, but then they'll also write their whole essay about study abroad. And like, I just read an essay about study abroad. I don't need to see it in those first 5 if you're also doing other things that you want to make sure I don't miss, right? Same thing with like our students who do semester programs, High Mountain Institute or Chewonki or one of those. We see that a lot in the first 5, and maybe it's because they held a leadership position there that they want to make sure I don't miss. But then they'll also write about their solo or whatever the thing that they did at their semester school that was really meaningful for them. And I can understand it because those activities are things that change a student. They change who they are and how they function and how they see the world. And so I can see why they want to put them in both places. But those students tend to also have lots of other really amazing things that they're doing outside of school. And I don't want to miss those other things. So it's sort of like you're giving away a space when you could be using that for something else.
Those applications can become a little monotonous
They
because
can.
they're so focused, and you're just left thinking, I'm glad we did this deep dive, but
Hmm.
I wonder what else we got.
Hmm.
What else is there to you? But you also appreciate the sincerity of them wanting to pour out
Yeah.
this life-changing experience.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Got to be multidimensional.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't, and they are multidimensional, right? And that's why I don't want to miss that other dimension of who they are.
What are your thoughts on students that are applying to direct admit programs or universities that admit by major? Does it make sense to be strategic for you to have in some of your activities if you're going into, let's say, a direct admit nursing program or business, that there's something in your activities that shows you're interested in those things that you're now applying to, as a direct admit program or a school that admits by major? Susan, I see you nodding your head. Any thoughts?
Oh, I believe wholeheartedly how important this is, Mark, because reading for the last few years for a university that read by the three undergraduate colleges, business, engineering, and arts and sciences, there was a very different expectation for the evidence that we looked at in the application that led us to believe that the student, first of all, knew what they were talking about and had some type of experience. It didn't have to be absolutely direct experience, but had transferable experience that would lead us to believe that they understood the skill set. And we also looked, of course, in the academic record for coursework that supported that
Sure.
choice, and there would
And
be different
recommendations. Yeah.
everything right along. But the student providing literally the evidence is the word that a lot of colleges use. Even with and I'd be interested to hear what Julia and Hillary say about this, coming from more of a liberal arts perspective. But even within applying to the College of Arts and Sciences, the very popular majors are so overrepresented in the applicant pool. So from my experience, and this may be a little different in different places, but psychology, neuroscience, biology, economics were the biggies. And when we had applicants in those areas, we also looked for evidence that the student was making a wise choice in that area, because it while it was arts and sciences, which meant that students weren't actually being admitted directly to the major, they were sort of their evaluation was being influenced by that choice. It wasn't as rigid as in business and engineering, but again, the evidence model was applied over and over again. And truthfully, it just makes sense if a student is interested in psychology or of course, computer science. I didn't mention, and that's an obvious one because that's often in the College of Arts and Sciences, and also in the engineering. But if the student appeared to really not have the wherewithal for for it being more than a vague, gee, I think I'd like that, they would have trouble competing for admission in a very selective situation against kids that did have, shared their reading that they had done and their experiential commitments that they had done. And again, it didn't have to be fancy, but, it could have been volunteering in the middle school computer science program or Girls Who Code or in a special ed classroom, where the student could draw on those experiences as part of that kind of evidentiary part of the evaluation.
Yeah, I find that's really particularly important, like the direct admit, like BSMD programs, direct admit nursing
Without a doubt.
programs, direct admit business programs, but especially some of those healthcare related ones, because part of that evaluation is, do you know what you're getting into? Like, we don't want you getting here and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. So you have to prove to them that you have sufficiently researched it enough to convince me that, yes, you want to do this. And activities is one of the many places, like, it'd be a really very much a missed opportunity to not show it there. Of course, also you need to show it through curriculum as well, right? And hopefully grades that show strength in that area, possibly a rec writer, like really your whole application. But to miss out on activities would be a real missed opportunity.
Vince had put down, I'm sure all of this is on all of our minds too, just about students who might have family responsibilities or household responsibilities, and not discounting those and or listing those.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Hillary said about the example of the person working at a Taco Bell or something. It's not just listing them, right? It's like what you learned, because I think sometimes, and just once again, I see extremes. Sometimes people get really excited when they can know that, oh, I can count sort of household chores. But if they're just listed, I think you want to say something, Hillary? I see you nodding over there.
So I was just at a case study program, 2 case study programs, which is an activity or an event where you get to read through 3 sample applications with students and parents. And one of the cases that I've been coming across a lot lately has a student who has a twin sister who has Down syndrome. And the student writes on his activities list, like he only has 3 things on his activities list, but the first one is sister to, I think his sister's name is like Xena or something. And he puts down, 52 weeks a year, 100, how many hours are in a week? I don't know, 152 or whatever hours in a week. And you read that and you're like, I don't really know what that means, because he doesn't explain it very well. But then later on in the application, you read about that his sister has Down syndrome, and that during COVID, like she ended up coming home and never really went back to school. And so he's her dance partner, he's her cook, he's her, the person that she plays board games with, all these different things. And I think the student's name is Zach. And so you find out that like Zach isn't just like blowing things up by saying like, oh yeah, I'm my sister's brother all the time, 24/7. Like he actually is taking care of her and a really important part of her daily routine. And that means something very different once you've actually read about how he's taking care of her. And I don't usually see that in applications. I'll see that a student is engaging in some sort of household responsibilities, but then they don't go on to explain it. And it's not that I don't believe them. I do believe them. It's way more compelling when you actually know what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it. And, when you're the person who has to carpool your little brothers and sisters around, like you can write that down, but it's very different when you tell me more about what that's like to have to drive your siblings all over the city every day. Right.
Right. I had a student that has that exact responsibility, and he couldn't continue with varsity baseball because he had to, drive his siblings around. Right. But that part needs to be in there in some way. So that way we know that it is impacted your life and your time in a way that this is the time you need to be doing this thing.
So let's wind it down. This has been awesome. First of all, thank all of you. Hillary, here you are giving up a Friday night, like this. Susan, you're always there when I'm calling you. And Julia is in bed. We are past 10 p.m. right now.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Julia is like, there's sometimes Julia's in bed at 7:30. Okay.
Yes. 7:45 asleep. Yes. Yeah. But I'm on it. This is good adrenaline. I like seeing all your faces, hearing all your voices. So
I want to thank everyone, and Vince as well. But I wondered if there's anything you wanted to just leave our listeners with, like one thing, and it could be something that's already been said, but just one thing that's kind of on your mind to leave our listeners with as they think of completing the activity section. Anyone want to share?
I will. I just want students to do what they want to do and to do what they need to do, and not to try to curate their time to try to impress someone, because you can't predict what's going to make someone else impressed. Just do what you love or what you need to do.
Ditto. Well said.
Yes, amen to that.
Yeah, I think we should close with that authenticity.
Mic
I really
drop
think,
from Hillary,
my mic drop moment. Trust that the schools that value what you did, will value what you did. And so this has been awesome, and it's been a lot of fun. I just want to thank you guys so much for your continual role in the podcast and just being there and just being thought partners for me through the week. I really appreciate all of you and just want to thank you guys.
Thank you. What better way to
Yeah.
spend a Friday night than hanging out
Totally.
talking about college admission? It's my favorite
I
thing.
love it.
It's pretty fun.
We
With
can be
great
nerds
people.
together.
Yes, with great people. With great people. Awesome. Friends, we meant it when we said that our roundtable discussion was a blast. We're a bunch of admissions geeks and nerds. We really are. And thank you for your feedback because we received positive feedback from you for this approach. So guess what? We're going to do it again. I can't promise I can find a time that's going to work for all 5 of us, but most of us will be back. And this time we will be discussing the honors section of the Common App. So if you want us to answer your questions about the honors section of the Common App, please go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and leave specific questions you have for us on the honors section of the Common App. Do not email them in. Send them in by SpeakPipe if you want us to answer them. And you can look for us to air this in either late June or early July. And thanks again for all your feedback, whether it's adjusting feedback or affirming feedback. It only helps us to serve you more effectively. Okay, let's transition to our SpeakPipe question from Kathie from California.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Lisa, it's been a while since you've done a QFL.
I know, it has.
Well, I'm happy to have you back. And let's play this question from Kathie from California, and I'll get your insights, and then I'll chime in.
Hi, this is Kathie from California, and I have a question regarding success in college. My daughter is finishing her second year at a smaller R1 university on the East Coast. She's a chemical engineering major and a multi-sport D3 athlete in the NESCAC. She also is in the school's wind ensemble. She's having a blast, enjoying all of her activities and her friends, and by no means a slacker in her studies. However, she's finding it hard to get summer internships, and I'm starting to think that her sports and music are taking time away from her applying for lab or research opportunities there on campus. My question is, how much will this impact her as she's applying for jobs post-graduation in 2 years if she has no experience outside the classroom? I don't want to put pressure on her to drop any of the things she's enjoying, but I'm just wondering if there will be a downside for not prioritizing gaining experience in her chosen field. Can't thank you enough for everything you do. Take care.
So where do you want to start?
Well, I thought this was a really great question and not one of those that's easy to answer, unfortunately for me, because I think that, I think it's great that Kathie's student is so involved in school and is doing all these things that interest them. But it sounds like Kathie is concerned that her child is not being career focused enough and doing research and doing internships. And I guess, the question is, will that kind of have a damaging effect on getting internships and jobs in the long run? Maybe, but also maybe not. There's something that's, you make connections when you're doing stuff you love. It's developmental. You grow from it. So that's a really hard question to answer. I don't know what your thoughts were.
Well, I agree it's hard, and I agree with you maybe and maybe not. It's difficult because on the one hand, it sounds like Kathie's daughter is just living her best life.
I know. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's probably going to look back and have really rich memories. I mean, multi-sport, D3 athlete, wind ensemble. Sounds like she's having a great experience. So I'm reluctant to squelch and squash that. But I also need to share something. And I hope this encourages rather than discourages people. But I had a student that finished up at Duke pretty recently. In fact, I think since you and I have been to Duke, Lisa, but it's just not one of the students that we got to meet when we were there. And she graduated from the Pratt School in biomedical engineering. And at Duke, biomedical engineering is considered the hardest major. And so people think engineering, everybody's banging down the doors. Duke, everybody's banging down the doors. Do you know 5 months after graduation, she never had a job? Mm-hmm. And, I was in touch with her and communicating with her, and she 100% attributed to the fact that she didn't do internships. Like all of the other people that did internships, they all had jobs. she did it. In fact, what she ended up doing, and just so everybody knows, it's all working out. It's all good. She's in a good place now. But she actually got recruited. There are these companies out there that do like these boot camps for you. And it's basically almost give you an internship type experience and train you. So she got recruited by one that does software engineering, not even biomedical. Mm-hmm. And they put her through like this 3 months. It was either a 2 or 3 month boot camp type experience that involved experiential learning as well as training her on some of the software aspects. And she didn't have to pay for it because these companies that do this, they strike up partnerships with the employment world and they get paid by the employment world for the placement. So it's kind of a good deal in a lot of ways because they come close to, I mean, I'm sure there's language in there that covers themselves, but they all but almost guarantee you go through this. And I mean, here's our incredible placement rate. And that's what she did. And that's what happened. So she went through their, it was between 2 to 3 months. I can't remember if it was like 75 days or 90 days. Software boot camp, retraining, experiential education. She got placed right away. She's happy. She's making the big bucks and everything was great. And she loved Duke. By the way, this is a crazy experience. I'm going way off on a tangent.
Uh-oh. Do I need to get my lasso and rope you back
rail
in?
me in? Maybe. So this same student, you know, she on her like revisit experience, her host, it was an overnight. Her host dumped her. Then when her host reconnected with her, she was drunk the whole night. And she had the absolute worst revisit. But she still picked the school and had a great experience at Duke. So that's just a little aside, like, you know, like, and we're going to talk, I know, coming up in the next few weeks, we got a question coming up on admitted student programs. But that was just a little interesting aside because most people would be like, I mean, the student obviously had a lot of options. I mean, if you're getting a Duke for engineering, you're getting in a lot of places. So anyway, reining it back in. So I think internships and co-ops are super underrated. I've shared this story on here before. I once had lunch with someone who told me I've hired Drexel co-op students for 20 years and have not made one bad hire when I've done that. Mm-hmm. It's just a confidence level. And think about it. On one hand, what's the traditional interview or what's the traditional hiring process? It's a resume, recommendations, and interviews. Even if it's a lot, like Joy had 7 hours of interviews for the UNC opportunities. It was a lot of interviews, but it's still, you compare that up against maybe 4 months, 6 months co-op. I mean, Case Western Reserve has like a 9-month one, or even internships, even if they're 15 hours a week for 3-4 months. Like just the ability for an employer to assess your critical thinking skills or your skill set in your discipline, your integrity, your responsibility, how you fit in with other co-workers, your teachability. I have seen internships and co-ops over the years just really, really, really be amazing at getting people jobs, and including jobs outside of their major too. Not even in their major. So it's hard. And I come back to what you said. This isn't easy because if you take everything that I'm saying, Kathie was like, gonna go to daughter, stop what you're doing now. That's not what I don't want to say that, but I also don't want to be naive. That to me is really the path, is getting these internships or co-ops with the right people. And the other thing about it too is it also helps you as well. It helps to get a job, but it also helps you to make a lot better decision.
Right.
So I focused on a lot of the things that the employer can use to figure out if you fit in corporate culture and get along with people and if you're going to be an asset. But you also get that opportunity to say, do I fit in here? Do I like it here? Do I like working with these people for this boss, doing this job description? So I'm a really, really huge fan of getting experiential. I'm not just experiential opportunities like research and teaching and study abroad. I'm a huge fan of those. And that's obviously one reason why we like Elon so much, because they do a good job on all of these things. They really check the boxes on all of these things. Friends, when I interviewed Emily Griffin on our podcast about 4 years ago on how to utilize the Career Center, Emily runs the Career Center at Amherst College. Emily really emphasized the correlation between students doing internships and getting full-time job offers, especially after your sophomore year and after your junior year. So what are your thoughts, Lisa? It looks like you have something you want to say.
It's kind of a question, and I don't know anything about Kathie's daughter, but
Sure.
she loves doing what she's doing, and she doesn't seem to be thrilled with the idea of going and doing some research or an internship. Like that's kind of like maybe tells us a little something about her feelings. I would hope that if you're a student and you're studying something and you like it, you'd be excited to be doing more in it, like having the internship opportunity or getting to do some research that's of interest to you. So I just, that to me is like a little flag.
So maybe we slightly heard things differently. Like I never heard her say her daughter has no interest in this stuff.
No, I'm just saying like you put your money where your time is, right? And her daughter's not putting time into it. She's drawn more to the sports and she's drawn more to music,
And it's really hard because if you I did sports in college. When you're on a team, if you love it, boy, that feels like like an abandonment to your fellow teammates to quit. And especially if you're enjoying it. It's almost like, I don't know if this is a good illustration, but it just popped in my mind. Let's say you're on a vacation in the Cayman Islands and like 3 or 4 days in, someone gives you an option to go do something else and you're having the time of your life. Like, you're probably like, no, I'm good. I'm having a good time snorkeling right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I could totally understand why the daughter doesn't want to give up the things that she's really enjoying. And did she say, because she said second year. So here's maybe the sweet spot is look to see what you can do in the summers.
Right.
That's what I would say. Now sometimes these D3 sports, you come back early, because she's a multi-sport athlete, but there still could be an opportunity to do something, even if it's a 4 or 6 week. That would be what I think would be the sweet spot here. Because I'm really not comfortable telling her to tell her daughter to cut back on a sport or drop wind ensemble and some of these other things. I'm really not comfortable with that, but I also do not want her or our listeners to be naive.
Right.
I mean, there's many, many reasons why I don't like it if I feel people are putting so much emphasis on the prestige of the school. But one of the reasons is they think the degree is an elixir that just opens the door in the Red Sea parts. And that's what the reason why I actually chose to name the name Duke in there, because I just thought it might lead to people thinking, oh, wow, well, a Duke engineering person is not finding work 5 months out. You have to take control of your education and not just think a degree just automatically opens doors. And that sometimes, I know that's how people think, because I'll hear people say, and you hear it too in the counseling room, wow, if I get in that school, I'm set, I'm made kind of thing. And it's no, you take control of things. And the thing about it is, I think sometimes some applicants and parents think, and I'm not saying most, but certainly some, they think, okay, well, if this school is more selective than this school, wouldn't an employer just automatically want to go and hire from that school? But that's actually not how a lot of employers think, right? They know there's talent everywhere. And if you pull back, most people have to actually go to their public school just for financial reasons. And maybe they wouldn't have had to go if they understood how to work a good strategic merit aid strategy, but they don't know that. I mean, I got a big number coming up here and I won't spoil it now, but it was a really high number of the percentage of people that do not even consider a school when they see a high sticker price. So tons of people end up not going to Uber Selective U just because of money. They don't even look at those schools. This is still surprising, but the most common number of schools that people apply to is still 1. I'm not saying it's the majority, but if you line up 1 versus 2 versus 3 and go all the way to 20, 1 has a bigger market share than any other, even today. Now, that's not our listeners, and that's not what we would advise. So I'm going a little bit off on a tangent here, but I'm just trying to say, like employer, the reason why I'm connecting the dots is employers know there's talent everywhere, and they'd much rather have someone that maybe didn't go to the most distinguished school, but it's still a good program, and they know there's talent there, and they feel like we can assess that over the course of working with you. And a lot of times, so many things employers have to reteach you anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing, and this is, I really don't want this to sound an anti uber selective school statement, but I am hearing from more people that sometimes graduates from some of the most brand names of the brand names are not always as teachable. They come in, feeling like they know what's going on. And I've heard that. I had a conversation recently with somebody high up in the hiring world, and that's exactly what they told me. Like, that's a trend, not just with me, with other people, is some of those students, it's hard to teach them because they feel they know everything. So, I think there can be a way she can have both.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great solution. I love the summer idea. So
I don't know why it took me like 10 minutes to pop in my head.
I didn't think of it at all. So, there we go.
We just had to get warmed up. It's all good.
Really get our brains. When you get older, it's just a little less of a direct route to the end, I suppose.
We got there. All right. Thanks, Lisa.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of how admissions offices evaluate homeschooled applicants. We start out with Liam talking about how homeschooled students demonstrate college readiness, and Holly chimes in and adds some other insights. Then Liam, Michele, and Holly discuss the role test scores play and how homeschooled applicants are evaluated. Michele and Holly discuss the challenge of advanced placement courses for homeschooled applicants. Liam talks about what he does in his role of homeschooled admissions liaison. And he answers the question, how common or how rare is it for a college to have a homeschooled specialist in their admission office? Listen and enjoy. I know a lot of homeschoolers do a lot of real creative, like learning by doing too. I can think of one that was, traveling and going to all these museums and sort of really creative learning by doing. Do you ever see that as sort of an impetus for sort of the creativity that can be implemented in this learning, as opposed to sitting in a chair all the time?
Absolutely. One of the students I worked with recently was a full-time costume designer and prop designer for a nonprofit that served 80 kids, a theater troupe, 80 kids. And this person had helped the previous, the adult who was in the role, and then became the head person. And as we looked at this, they did it because it was fun, because they loved doing it, and that was their thing, right? When we looked at what they'd done, think about it. You talk about geometry in a classroom, and you think about the proofs and the calculations and the triangles and all this. That kid was dealing with budgets and laying out fabric to use as little as possible. They were doing geometry, learning geometry in a hands-on fashion. So not only do kids get to do awesome things, when you look at the standards of what they're supposed to learn in high school, they may be learning those without intending to follow the strict curriculum. Yes.
Now, one of the reasons I think some people don't homeschool is they feel as if you need sort of the imprimatur of an official school with a transcript and that sort of validation piece to be respected by the colleges. So how do homeschool students demonstrate rigor and college readiness?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to say about that is that, Holly did a great job explaining some of these numbers, right? And pointing out that it's not like there's this group of students in the country who are normal and they go to this one type of school, and that's 99% of the students in the country. And then there's homeschoolers over here that are radically different. Every year we receive hundreds and hundreds of applications from schools where we've never had an application before, right? And some of those schools have narrative evaluations. Some of them have standards-based grading and diplomas. Some of those schools are full IB curriculum. Some of those schools are everything is taught at an honors level and students have no control, no class choice. Everyone's on the same exact track. So there's no question of, this student took AP and this student didn't or something like that. So when you put a homeschool applicant in that context, there may be one step further or, one, slot over in terms of the type of information we have or don't have about them. But it's not this sort of black and white, all our applicants look one way and then homeschoolers look like something different. I think in terms of capturing rigor, it really depends. It's a question of trying to accurately reflect what the student has done. So if a student is, enrolled in a ton of community college classes, great, we've got college grades and, and they've taken challenging courses and we have that information. If a student is enrolled in an online program, as we talked about earlier, right, we have some of that information. But if we don't have that information, we're looking for what has the student actually done? What are the texts that they've read? What is the work that they've produced? Have they worked with, former college professors, right? Who's been evaluating their work? And sometimes we can even see a homeschooler's work, right? Send us a, literary analysis paper or a lab report, or send us some of the fabulous costumes you designed. So it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. This is what a homeschool application has to look like. It's a question of trying to capture the, often fabulous work that a student has done.
I think it's just such an excellent question you asked, because I think you're really putting your finger on the pulse of what a lot of potential home educators and even longtime home educators feel when their oldest gets to 9th grade. It feels very scary to them, no matter how long you've been homeschooling. And sometimes I think because a path is unique to you, you think it is a unique path. What I would encourage parents to think about is the fact that homeschoolers have been applying to colleges and universities since the 1980s at least. We've been doing this a long time collectively. So while it is scary to the individual homeschooling family, this is a well-trod path. And in fact, I would say well-trod to the point that you can't think just because you're homeschooled that your application is automatically going to be like, woo, and people are going to be impressed. They're not. Homeschooling is routine. It is much more, what do you do with those opportunities? And speaking to the rigor, I would say I don't think we've mentioned it yet. Michele and I are writing a book all about this, how to design and document your homeschool journey. It's part of the College Unmazed series. And something we're really trying to get across to the parents there is that your counselor documents matter because you're in charge of those. You're in charge of the transcript and the course description and the homeschool profile and the counselor letter. And you have a lot of opportunity to shape the narrative there. And when you do that in a way that makes sense and conveys the why behind your choices, then it is going to be very easy to demonstrate the rigor that you've injected into your students' path.
I really liked all of your answers, and I liked, Liam, how you framed it initially by saying there are a lot of students for whom they're not coming with a large amount of contextual information from their school, one-off schools that we hardly ever get an applicant from. And of course, implicit in that is, you're professionals at learning how to evaluate all kinds of different backgrounds. That's what you do. I think that really set the stage. And then Holly, I appreciate what you added on to that as well. So let's talk standardized testing, because I know some schools will say we're test optional, but not for homeschoolers or not for international students or this kind of thing. So do you feel as if there's a different role of standardized testing for homeschoolers compared to other applicants? Or what do you want to say about homeschoolers and standardized testing? Because logic also infers like that's one more way to prove a certain level of rigor if anybody does have a question about curriculum or that kind of thing. Thoughts on that, Liam?
Sure. I think I bet we all have quite a few things to say on this subject.
We'll get Michele and Holly to chime in too.
The first thing that I think from a philosophical standpoint is really important is I, as an individual, and I feel comfortable speaking for Beloit on this subject as well. We don't think it's ethical to ask applicants from particular backgrounds to do something additional in the application process just because they're coming from that particular background, right? And so we are test optional for all of our domestic applicants. We are also test optional for homeschoolers. Since you brought it up, we're test optional for international students when it comes to things like SATs. We require documentation of English proficiency, which is a type of testing, but is also, if a student hasn't studied in English, we really need that understanding. But overall, we're a test optional school, and we are also test optional for homeschoolers. And I think that is the ethical thing to do. To Holly's point, then the burden shifts to the homeschooler. Just because you are a homeschooler doesn't mean that automatically what you've done is enough to get into any particular college, right? Particularly colleges that are incredibly competitive, right? That are admitting 3, 4, 5, 10% of applicants. You're going to have to put together a really, really strong application. And so testing, as you said, Mark, is one tool in that arsenal that can be combined or used instead of community college courses or evaluations, letters of recommendations from, really well-trained teachers, portfolios, interviews. There are lots of different things that students can use to put together a strong app, and test scores are one of those tools. I will say that I think that there can be a place where test scores can serve a different role for homeschoolers than they do for a more typical applicant, where for many applicants, they're looking for the test score to be the thing that kind of launches them to the top of the pile, right? The test score is going to be the thing that really sets their application apart from other students who maybe have a similar GPA or similar, background in other ways. And for homeschoolers, depending on the type of school they're applying to and how competitive it may be, there's space for the test score to be really a pretty average score overall, or possibly even a slightly below average score, but still to be the thing that says, okay, we've got sort of proof in a language that we understand, right? And this sort of, standardized thing. That's what standardized tests do for the most part. That we've got a pretty good sense of sort of the subjects you've been exposed to and the types of things that you can do. Again, there are plenty of other ways to do that, but I do think that homeschoolers can think about testing strategically as part of the whole suite of components they want to send into a college.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
This is Linda with this week's recommended resource, the College Openings Update from the National Association for College Admission Counseling, or NACAC. That's a long name for this resource that provides continuously updated information on colleges and universities still accepting applications for the upcoming fall semester. It's perfect for students who've maybe started their college search a little late, are looking for additional options, or exploring transfers. The site also includes details on available financial aid and housing. Learn more about the colleges still welcoming applications on the front page of nacacnet.org.
Before I get Holly or Michele to share any thoughts they have, I know, Liam, you indicated Beloit's position, but would it be fair to say that you're aware of other schools that either require or recommend testing for homeschool applicants, and that everybody has the Beloit position on that?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. And of course, there are colleges that require testing for everyone, right? And there are colleges that are test optional for everyone, but there's real nuance to that policy where families need to do research on, yes, they're test optional, but 80% of the students who are admitted submit testing, or yes, they're test optional, but tests are required for merit scholarships, right? So families, even outside of homeschoolers, unfortunately, really need to be doing that research college to college right now to be making strategic decisions. So from a homeschool perspective, I think that critical piece is whether or not test scores are required for an institution. You can think about your test scores as, yeah, maybe I'm not in the top 25 percentile for this particular college, but I know they're going to strengthen my individual application. Which might not be the case for a student coming from a more traditional school background.
Well said. Michele, it looked like you wanted to chime in with something on testing.
Well, there's a lot to say about standardized tests, but I want to go beyond the ACT and the SAT to think about CLEP tests, AP
Sure.
exams, other kinds of exams, because for a long time, many homeschoolers have used those to strengthen their applications. Like Liam said, when I'm working with a family, we talk about finding some way to validate the grades that the parents give, some way to demonstrate that there's been some objective outside validation in each of the core subjects, whether that's a test, a community college class, whatever it is. But APs, especially since the pandemic, APs have been particularly challenging because what has happened is they're administered in schools, by teachers who aren't being paid extra to do this. Right? The College Board isn't paying them for this. When we have the lockdowns that we had and we restricted more people from coming into schools said, oh, when they got back to running again, they said, we don't want anybody else coming into the school, so we don't want seats. We're not going to give seats to homeschoolers. So even in your local public school district where your kid is allowed to go by law, you could drop them off today and they have to take them. They can't take the AP exam because the school says, we're not going to have anybody who's not registered for and taking our class from starting in August or September, because they order those exams in the fall. They order them in October, even though those happen in the summer, not in the spring. So homeschoolers might think, oh, it's January. I'm going to pick up this subject, or I've done a lot in this subject. Hey, I want to take this AP exam, and not be able to get it. So this has put up an additional barrier, which is really frustrating inside the homeschool community, because they are a nice opportunity to demonstrate rigor.
That makes sense.
And, it's worth noting that does vary state by state. So in some states, homeschoolers don't have any trouble getting AP seats, but in a lot of states, they do. And I think Michele and I probably agree that we are both continually surprised at the number of admission officers who maybe aren't quite as well versed as Liam about homeschoolers who don't know that. They don't know that AP seats are a challenge in many cases. So again, that points to the work we do with homeschool parents, that you've got to explain that. It doesn't matter so much whether you took AP or not AP, but explain your choice. Did you choose a dual enrollment route because you could not get an AP exam seat? That needs to be stated in your documentation. And with SAT and ACT, we don't face those same challenges, at least not yet, because you can sign up online and pick whatever school you want to take that test at. As the SAT goes and ACT go more and more to school day testing, I do wonder if that is going to begin to squeeze out homeschoolers. So it's just something we're watching, and time will tell.
Liam, how common is it for colleges to sort of have a homeschool specialist like you who, is in that unique role? Is that something, without anecdotally, I'm sure you haven't seen a statistic, but the majority of colleges have. It's very rare to have it. And then a part two to that is talk about what that means that you have that role. Should you be the go-to if there's a homeschool applicant and they have questions, they should reach out to you? Does that mean you're involved in homeschool recruitment? Does that mean you train the staff on how to interpret, homeschoolers' backgrounds when you get applicants? Like what is their role? So how often do you see schools have it? And tell me what's involved in that role that families that have a homeschool student should know about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the general idea of having someone in admissions who specializes, period, not necessarily in homeschooled students, is very, very common. It's most common in the international market for obvious reasons. Counselors have to understand, transcripts and grading scales and all of these things in many, many different cultures, and then figure out how to try to compare apples to apples out of that. But even just geographic regions in the United States, my colleague knows the Chicago public school system really well. I know the Boston public school system better, right? And so you're looking at, these students had these types of courses available to them or didn't, or, I happen to know the school system in my part of the country is on strike right now, right? And so letters of recommendations are going to be delayed coming in, or just all of those little cultural nuances are really, really helpful when we're trying to, fairly evaluate applicants with an understanding of their background rather than just trying to sort of compare numbers on a page that don't have a lot of meaning to them. Homeschooled specific, it's of course going to vary depending on the volume of homeschool applications a college receives. There are colleges where homeschool applications could make up as much as 15 or 20% of their applicant pool if they're really, really homeschool friendly and it's a good fit and they're in a part of the country where it's very popular. And then there are schools where it might be 0.3% or something like that of their applicant pool. And so there's always going to be somebody who is overseeing homeschool policy, right? The admissions office as a whole is going to have to be making homeschool policy decisions do we require SAT or ACT scores for homeschoolers, even if we don't for other students? And that's going to be happening at the, sort of senior leadership level in the admissions office. And then sometimes homeschoolers are lumped in with geographic territories where, everybody who reads New York, then, works with homeschoolers in that state, and other times they're broken out. Certainly, it's very common for there to be somebody on a team who focuses on homeschoolers. Exactly what that role looks like is much more varied, and whether that's publicized is varied, right? So it's sort of proudly on our website that's something I do, and I welcome correspondence from families. I'm happy to share advice with families about how to put together a strong transcript and some of those elements of a homeschool education. There are other institutions where somebody might be reading homeschool applications, but that's behind a couple of layers of sort of bureaucracy. It's not necessarily out there publicly. In my particular setup, I read all homeschool applications. Other colleagues read them as well, but I will have eyes on just about every homeschool application that comes through, so I can think of them as a cohort and understand the way they are alike and the way they're different, and understand their context rather than one of my colleagues getting sort of a random application coming across their desk that doesn't make a lot of sense to them. I do training with my colleagues to help, when we have campus visits from homeschoolers or phone calls from homeschoolers, right, to make sure that they're able to answer basic questions, but then they know that if somebody wants to have a really nuanced conversation, they'll pass that person on to me. Certainly some homeschool communication. I'm always thrilled when we get an opportunity like this to talk about, hopefully a service to the community overall and help homeschoolers put together strong apps, but also to let them know that we are a really friendly institution and would be happy to talk to them more. We don't do a ton of sort of direct and active recruitment of homeschoolers, which some institutions do. But it can be a little bit challenging to figure out how to get in front of the right people. With schooled students, there are a lot of very traditional tools that we use to find students with the right interests, the right academic credentials, right? And we work with all sorts of different organizations to connect us with students, right on down to actually showing up in high schools. And that's, of course, much more challenging with homeschoolers. We're not going to go to, 3,000 people's individual houses and sit down at their kitchen tables. So we have to find other ways to connect with those students.
Michele?
Liam touched on something really important, both about knowing the geographic region and knowing homeschool requirements, because different states have different regulations. Some have very, very little, and some have really specific. New York State, you have to file a quarterly report every quarter, as well as your documentation, and they'll give you a letter at the end of high school from the district. If the college has gotten a lot of students, or say it's in New York and it's gotten a lot of students, of course, from New York applying to it, they may think, oh, homeschoolers can get letters from their district and put that in as a requirement. Whereas in Massachusetts, we have to give information to our district, but they do not give us any certification that we did anything. That's not something they do. And Illinois doesn't even want to know that you homeschool. So the college may have information and requirements that's based on their understanding at the time when they wrote that webpage of what homeschooling is. So I want to encourage families, reach out if there's a requirement that you just can't meet because your state doesn't provide that document. Reach out to admissions. People like Liam, people like the people he's trained will know who to tell it to. And independent educational consultants like Holly and myself, we do that when we talk to admissions as well. We say, hey, do you know that you're saying this? And that works for those students in these states, but it doesn't work for students in these other states. But I've found everybody to be very friendly about that in admissions.
That's good. That's really good. Friends, this concludes the second part of our interview on how homeschooled applicants are evaluated by admission offices. We hope you'll join us next week for part 3 of 4.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
And friends, in the final part of my interview with Michael Keaton, the VP of Enrollment at Ursinus College, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, he starts out by talking about the merit scholarships that Ursinus College offers and how generous they are. Then Michael talks about the creative writing program at Ursinus College. Michael talks about some of the famous people that are affiliated with Ursinus. Then Michael goes on the hot seat, and Michael gives some sage advice that I hope every single student of every parent listens to. Listen and enjoy. You know, another time when I'll refer you guys a lot is you can have some pretty generous merit aid packages. And a lot of times, you know, students that are looking, they like small liberal arts, they like the idea of greater Philly area. You know, if they come back, just like we kind of talked about earlier, and like, gee, you know, I got my formerly EFC, now SAI, and it says I'm not going to qualify for anything, but I don't feel like I can pay, you know, 80, 90,000. You know, that person I can't recommend to Haverford College or Swarthmore College or F&M. F&M doesn't do, they only do need-based aid, but especially a future doctor, they're saying to me, I'm looking at the cost of medical school ahead of me. I need to be able to get my undergrad for under 50. I'll oftentimes put your school on the list, and I've always been pleased with the merit packages that students get. You want to talk a little bit about how merit scholarships work at your school?
Sure. We evaluate every student that we're going to admit for merit scholarship money, and virtually everybody gets something. The awards are all the way up to $40,000 for our Zacharias scholarship, which named after Zacharias Ursinus, which the college was named after him. So that's $40,000
per year. Per year, everybody. That's per year. Yeah.
$40,000 per year. So everyone is evaluated, and almost everyone gets something. We are test optional and have been way before the pandemic. So been test optional for many years. You don't need to supply SAT or ACT to be considered for merit scholarships. So we're taking a holistic approach. Certainly academic achievement is the main component. So looking very critically at the high school transcript, what courses were chosen versus what was available, how many were taken at the highest level, what are the grades that were achieved in those coursework. If students do supply standardized testing, you know, we'll factor that into it. And then looking at extracurriculars, displays of leadership, special talent, the evaluations from teachers and college counselors. So it's a holistic approach, but definitely the academic achievement portion is the main focus. And so very basically speaking, the stronger students are in the classroom, the more merit money that they will receive from us. And then we also have several specialty scholarships, which are in particular areas. Now that for those, there is a separate application process. You know, for the general merit program, it's just you apply to the college and we evaluate you for scholarships. For these specialty scholarships, which might be in creative writing or dance or social justice, there's an application process and an evaluation process, and other folks outside of the admission office are involved in choosing those. So we again want to prioritize access and affordability, and so we try to be as aggressive as we can to make Ursinus financially feasible for as many of our students as we can.
Michael, this has been awesome. Is there anything about Ursinus that you haven't shared that you want to share before we transition to what we call the hot seat, our lightning round?
Just a fun fact. I mean, other people might not find this fun, but J.D. Salinger attended Ursinus. He didn't graduate from Ursinus, but he attended, and folks for that creative writing specialty scholarship that I mentioned, the winner has the opportunity to live in his actual dorm room, which I think is kind of
smart.
cool. So
that was
I
smart.
mentioned that because when I was in high school, of course, everybody knows Catcher in the Rye, and that's the book usually folks have to read, which I liked, but I was really into Franny and Zoe in high school and some of the others. So I didn't know this until I actually started working here. And then the other thing, again, because I told you pop culture, but the series How to Get Away with Murder, some of the classroom scenes were shot here, and I saw every episode. It's a show that takes place in Philly, so it takes place in Philly. It's on a college campus. Of course, I'm going to watch that, but I didn't know until I actually was working here that that's where this was filmed. So it was a big deal for me the first time I got to present to actually a couple of football recruits in that room, and I'm like, I'm standing at the same spot that Viola Davis was standing when she was leading her classes on that show.
Awesome. I love those little fun facts. All right, Michael, what kind of music's playing in the AirPods or whatever? Tell us about your favorite kind of music.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I am a big music fan, and there's a lot of different genres that I like. So I'm a big hardcore punk fan, especially a lot of the 80s bands. So Youth of Today, Sick of It All, Judge, that kind of stuff. I also like a lot of metal bands, so things like Megadeth, Metallica before 1988, not after 1988.
Oh, he's a music aficionado. He drew a 1988 line here for us.
Two different bands, pre and post 88. Slayer, a lot of classic rock too. Jimi Hendrix is my all-time favorite. So he was a lefty, I'm a lefty. I picked up a guitar because of Jimi Hendrix. Led Zeppelin is one of my favorites. Also love folks like Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. More recently, in the last 10 years, Townes Van Zandt, who is a great sort of outlaw country singer-songwriter kind of guy. He's one of my favorites. So if it sounds good to me, I like it. Grew up having extreme disdain for a lot of 80s pop tunes, but now with nostalgia kicking in, I enjoy some of the stuff that I wasn't necessarily a fan of back then. So there's always music playing and always different varieties and kinds, and I switch it up depending upon the mood or activity that I'm engaged with at the time.
You're ready for me on that one. You're ready. What's your favorite type of food, cuisine?
Favorite type of food. So you said earlier, something about not trying to sell a steak to a vegetarian. And I'm a relatively new vegan, and I do love food. So some of my favorites I love Jamaican food. So I've come to learn how to make veganized versions of Jamaican curry goat, because that was one of my favorite dishes. Always have loved pizza, and in Philly we have a couple of great vegan pizza spots, so I enjoy that. Indian and Thai are also favorites as well, both before I was vegan and now that I am. They translate really well. But food is one of the things that Julia and I first bonded over.
She told me, and I know how much she's a foodie.
Yes.
Well, Thai and Indian are my favorite. You nailed my favorite too. And I have to ask you if you still have this. You have an Italian restaurant that's really close to Ursina. It's like walking distance. And they have the best bruschetta I've ever had. In fact, I had bruschetta when I was there in 2019. It was so good that I ordered a whole to-go order. And sometimes I still get cravings for that bruschetta.
That's serious for bruschetta. I like it okay, but I don't think I've ever had life-changing bruschetta like that. What's the name of the place?
I'm trying to remember, but I know it was walking distance because I know I pretty much parked in the parking lot and walked there.
I think if it was right on Main Street, there is one. I haven't been there yet, and I can't think of the name of it.
It's on Main Street.
I drive by it every day on the right side of the road as you're leaving campus, going toward. Yeah, it's still there. Yes,
check it out. You'll remember it. So you're flying and traveling around. What is your airport pet peeve?
Oh gosh, people that don't fly and travel around and just don't know where to go, don't know where to stand, and don't know to take off their shoes when they're going through security, that kind of thing. You just made me think of this experience many years ago. My wife, who I met in admissions, so she, is used to doing a lot of the same travel, and we were traveling with some family members who were, I'll just say, older and less traveled, and we just looked at each other and we're like, oh gosh, like we have to remember, we know how to do this. We're flying all the time, we're on planes all the time, and everybody that hasn't had the same kind of experiences. But I don't mind being in the air, but I also don't like how early you have to show up for flights, and I try not to go to the airport unless it's going to be 6 hour or more. If I can drive there in 6 hours or less, then I'd just rather drive than mess around with the airports.
I hear you. What's the place on the bucket list you haven't been yet and you're determined to get there?
Oh gosh, there's a few. I'm 49 years old and have yet to visit the old world. So this summer we have plans to go to Ireland and Scotland, and that'll be cool. Julia mentioned my study of rhetoric in college and speech communication, and so I've always wanted to go to Athens and sort of walk the same streets that the Sophists walked thousands of years ago, and certainly Italy for the food. And where else? Well, in particular, and this goes back to the music piece, but London in particular, which I'm going to be so close, but I don't know that I'm going to get there this summer. But Jimi Hendrix lived in a flat in London, which happened to be the same flat that Handel wrote The Messiah in. And now they have this museum, the Hendrix Handel House. And so I need to get over there to see that, because Jimi Hendrix for me, it's not just about music, but it's just been part of the reason I have the afro.
I was going to ask you, does the afro have anything to do with Jimi Hendrix?
Jimi Hendrix, Dr. J, and the Black Panthers are
there you go. There you go.
Folks that inspired me to grow my hair out like this.
Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Last question. A student's listening, a parent's listening. What's your advice for them?
My advice is, and I'll talk primarily to the students here, but parents, you support your students with this as you are entering and engaging with the college search process and eventually the college application process. Be a good storyteller, right? Think of your application as telling a story. Admission folks love working with students. We would love to sit down and interview and chat with and meet one-on-one with every student, but the reality is that we don't get to do that for most students. Even places that do interviews and visit high schools, we're still not meeting most of the students that are applying to our institutions. So we're relying on you to tell us a story. And there's lots of great expert advice out there. So podcasts like this, your college counselor, great sources on the internet, but start with looking inward and asking yourself, why am I even engaging with this process? Why do I want to go to college? Not why do my parents want me to go, or my teachers, or what are the rest of my friends doing, but what are your individual motivations? And when you ask those questions of yourself, you'll get to know yourself a little bit better. And when you get to know yourself a little bit better, that is going to help lead you to places that are going to be really good fits. And when you find those places that are going to be really good fits, that's going to make it easier to just not be successful, but actually thrive. You want to bloom and blossom and grow in college. And getting to know yourself will help lead you to places that will be a good fit and help you to continue that journey of self-discovery. So be a good storyteller. Think about what you want to say, what the statement is that you want to get across to the admission officer. Certainly the essay is there for that, or I like to call it the personal statement because it's the name of the piece of writing, but also direction. It should be personal and should be some kind of statement that you're telling us about what you want to do, what you want to get out of the experience, what you're looking for out of your college experience. And I wish everybody the best of luck as well.
That is admissions gold right there. You are, I can't keep track, but I know we've had 170 something plus interviews. You're the first one to come there. I always like to end my interviews with that question about advice, and you're the first one to talk about storytelling. And so sometimes when I get one I really like, I'll like replay it at the end of different endings. And I think that's a little excerpt there. I think that's admissions gold. So you not only survived the hot seat, I would say you thrived on the hot seat. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. This has really been great. And I know how much your friendship has meant to Julia, so it's great to do it with all three of you. And it's just great to see you. I mean, we were emailing early in the week, and we couldn't believe it's been, I think, 17 years, since we last saw each other.
Yes, it's crazy. I think I shared you my new favorite quote that I've been saying the past few years, that time is the only thing where the more I experience it, the less I understand it.
So it's true.
Crazy that it's been 17 years, but well worth the wait. And I appreciate the invitation, and what a great way for us to have a reunion, Mark. And certainly, Julia's friendship is very, very important, not only to me, but also to my family. She's been a great and wonderful friend to the family. So this has been great being on the podcast. I don't do very many podcasts, but it's been wonderful and enjoyable. And again, I appreciate the invitation.
My pleasure. Well, we'll let you go about your way. I know you've had a busy day, and before we got in air, we talked a little bit about Mike's travels and what he's done in the last 24 hours. So we'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. But thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks, friends. Take care.
Take care. Friends, on Monday's episode, Allison from New Jersey has a question. She has 3 high school students, and they're all 18 months apart. And she wants to know if we have any organizational tips to help her manage the college process. And Julia will join me for that section. We'll continue my interview with Jeff Salingo on how to tell if a college is struggling financially, but we'll also cover a range of other topics such as his book, Who Gets In and Why, his upcoming 2025 book, and some other questions on topics such as dual enrollment or dual credits. Friends, I leave you with a quote. I've been searching around trying to figure out who authored this quote, and from everything I can find, nobody really knows who penned the quote. But nevertheless, it doesn't stop me because I like it a lot. And it simply says this: happiness is not something you find. Happiness is something that you create. Now, the closest I can find to that is a quote that came from Voltaire. Well, Voltaire actually had quite a few quotes on happiness, but I'll leave you with one for the day. The most important decision you make is to be in a good mood. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, Follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.